Alright, for this video, I wanted to talk about the additional child tax credit. And specifically, I want to go into how this tax credit interacts with the regular child tax credit, the $2,000 credit that most taxpayers are familiar with. There are some subtle differences between these two, but there is some overlap. And so that's what I want to go over is the rules, how these work together. And then I have three examples here, and I've also got the tax returns as well. So we'll look at those, and I think if you can see the numbers down on the return, it'll make a little bit more sense. So what are the differences and similarities between these two? Well, the short answer is it's really the same thing. So the additional child tax credit, the ACTC, refers to the piece of the child tax credit that is refundable. And so, what do we mean by refundable? Well, the child tax credit is initially non refundable in that when you claim this $2,000 per child, you have to have some tax, right? So, you have tax liability owed, and the $2,000 is a dollar for dollar reduction in your tax. In your total tax owed on the return. And it can reduce that down to zero, but not a negative number. And so if it's reduced to zero and you have some extra left over, you don't necessarily get a tax refund, right? Again, it's just used as a dollar for dollar reduction in the tax. The ACTC is an additional computation as soon as you've already taken that. And that's where you might get a tax refund. Okay, so even in situations where your tax liability has been reduced to zero because you claim the child tax credit, any excess that wasn't available to be used might be able to get refunded to you as a refundable additional child tax credit. All right. So let's look at these three examples here. And then again, I have a PDF version of the returns, which we'll look at those as well. And I think that might help provide some clarity here. So the example we're going to be using here, we have John, who has one child, Emily, who's 3 years old. And John's a single parent, head of household, so he files head of household Form 1040, and he claimed the child tax credit of $2,000 for his daughter, Emily. Now, the total taxes that John initially owed, and this is on line 16 of his Form 1040, was $8,500, okay? Now, the $2,000 child tax credit, what that did was that was a dollar for dollar reduction in his taxes owed, and so it lowered his taxes to $6,500. Now in this first one, there's no additional child tax credit because he's already used the full $2,000 to reduce his tax liability on his return, right? And he still owes some tax, right? The credit didn't wipe out his tax liability altogether. In these next two examples, we're going to see how the ACTC comes into play here. So in our next example, let's assume the same thing, except for this one, maybe John's income is much lower. So he filed head of household, he claimed the $2,000 credit, right? It's $2,000 per child, assuming your income is below the relevant thresholds, because obviously there are some phase outs, but let's say he claims the $2,000 and he's getting the full $2,000. The taxes he owed on his return before factoring in this credit was $1,708. So the $2,000 wipes that out. So it takes a dollar for dollar reduction in the 1708. And so now what he's done is he's got zero tax owed. He's used $1,708 of the $2,000 credit. So there's an extra $292. What happens to that money? Well, if we look at his return here, so in this example, we have John taxpayer filing head of household. This is all of his income information adjustments. We can see down here his taxable income is $16,839, and then his total tax again up here is the $1,708. Now the child tax credit is reported on line 19. Okay, so there's the 1708 flowing from Schedule 8812, but notice the credit is $2,000, but we're only using 1708 here. So he has 1708 of tax, wipes all that out with the credit from the child tax credit. So now his tax is down to zero. Based on his income, filing status, and the amount of credit that's left over, he is able to claim the additional child tax credit reported here in line 28 for $292, right? So what we can see here is that if we do some simple math, right, 1708 in the credit claimed up there on line 19 plus the 292 in the refundable piece, there's his 2000. So he is getting the full $2,000 child tax credit. It's just being split between these two components. One portion is just a non-refundable dollar for dollar reduction in tax, and then the excess is the refundable additional child tax credit. Okay? Now, what happens if he does not get to refund that excess? Let's look at an example where that would occur. So same thing, John has one child, Emily, files as head of household. But in this scenario, let's assume that John's income is much lower. So he still gets the $2,000 child tax credit, right? That's being claimed on the 8812 initially. But the total taxes he owed is only $166. And that's because his wages, all of his income is much lower, right? And so after he takes that standard deduction, his taxable income is lower. He only owes $166. So now the same kind of exercise applies, right? He had the $2,000 child tax credit, which was a dollar for dollar reduction against the 166, lowered his income down to zero. But what about the extra now? He didn't use the full $2,000. So there's an extra $1,834. How much can he get back? Well, this is where the limitations start to kick in. So under the rules, the additional child tax credit, the refundable piece, can't exceed $1,500. So $1,500 is the maximum amount of refund that you can get on the additional child tax credit. So if we look for, let me go to the next return. This is where we have the fact pattern we're just working with now. So his income is much lower. Taxable income is only $1,839. And so here when we get down to page 2, we can see the tax there, again, $166. The child tax credit taken, $166, right? So that reduces his total tax to zero. But then again, $166, if we look at how much that was used, the credit is $2,000 and we've only taken $166. So we have $1,834 left over. How do we get that money back? Well, with the refundable additional child tax credit, again, it's capped at $1,500. You can't get more than that. So if we look at the 8812 down here, so I've got other videos going over the 8812 in more detail, but again, in part 1, where we compute the initial credit, right, we've got one child, a $2,000 credit, but the limit on the credit is limited to our tax liability. So that's why it's capped at $166. It's in the second page where we compute the additional child tax credit, the refundable portion. And here in part 2A, we can see that, again, if you have qualifying children under 17, just one, $1,500 is the maximum amount of refundable credit you can get. And so that's why after we do the math here, he's not getting $1,834 back. He's only getting the $1,500. So that's why on line 28 here, we see $1,500 reported rather than the $1,834. So there's a little bit of leakage here, right? So of the $2,000 credit, he gets $1,500 and $166. So basically, he's getting $1,666 of that credit, and then the rest of it is just lost, right? And so the last line item here has the additional math, right? So the remaining $334, unfortunately, can't do anything with that. That's just loss. You can't get that money. So of the $2,000 CTC, 166 is that non-refundable portion. Again, that just wipes out your tax. And then the extra amount is unfortunately capped at $1,500. So although he was looking for the extra $1,834, only $1,500 is available, and so that's all he's going to get. So I hope that was helpful. Again, that the additional child tax credit, don't think of it as a separate one, right? It is a component piece of the child tax credit. It just depending on your taxpayer situation, it might apply to you in some respect or not at all. And you could see through these 3 examples here, right? In the first one, it didn't apply at all because he still had some taxes owed, but in the other 2, it was an issue, right? In this example in the middle, John was able to get the full thing back, versus in the very last example there, given his income level, he was not able to leverage the full $2,000 credit. All right, so I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, obviously leave a comment below, and I look forward to seeing you again on the next video. Thank you.